Hello, people. This week, I decided to read Collision of Empires War on the Eastern Front, 1914. Now, the guy starts in the very beginning of the book, which with almost the exact reasons why I wanted to read this book. We know heapings and helpings of World War I, right? It's very popular. There's the movies made about it. I think some part of it is the names may be easier to say, the places are easier to say, right? But it's all wound up to sort of a back half of a war that I think the general populace, me included, don't know enough about, right? So I'm like, hey, here's a book. I think this is a multi-part series, so it's not the entirety of the war. But that I liked that about it. I like my histories being more in depth. So this is only the Eastern Front. The Eastern Front being Austria-Hungary, Russia, Germany, that side of the world. So all the other parts of World War I don't really get brought up as much if they don't pertain to this. I always remember this war, World War I. I remember it like I was there. I remember when I'm first learning about it. It was always the oddest one to me. Because, you'd hear all these battles and people getting killed in the hundreds of thousands. And it never clicked in my head. Like, why? Why don't you just go around? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Obviously, when you get older and you look more, you understand. Different culture, different time. They had their different honor systems and whatnot. But this book did a lot. It does a lot to sort of illuminate those odd reasons for World War I even being World War I. He'll cover each sort of, phase or country from its point of view mostly at a time. It began, what did we say? We start with sort of inner politics, then we get heavy into some war, and then we sort of have an overview. When I mean heavy into war, I don't mean like bloody descriptions. I'm talking von Falkenhayn, owning divisions 1, 7, and 9, and sending Corps 3 to the left of this river and Corps 4 to the right, and that corps fought this guy's 7th Corps and pushed that corps back, right? This kind of, we're moving those, when they show war stuff on History Channel or whatever, those blue and red blocks. He talks in that sense, these broad brushes. So you don't get, right, like the story of one soldier running up a hill, this kind of thing. You don't have a lot of that. There are plenty of movies about that. He does it. It's a brutal war, and it's not that he's shying away from it, but his subject matter, the people he's picked to cover, if it didn't affect them really, he's not going to go too much into it. So in that sense, it doesn't get, let's say, distracted. It's also not very gory as war books can be. It's a straight history. But it also makes it incredibly difficult to follow along unless you just really know the area. So if you're going to read this, even if you're reading it, like I listen to the Audible. So I think even if you're reading the book, I would pull up a map somewhere of the area to sort of try and track where, who, and what is and what's going on, because we go deep into it. In a lot of ways, it feels like what do we say? Military science, almost like a science book, where if you were a professional soldier, this might be something you could study and have a greater understanding of your profession, right? It goes that deep. So I'm not even going to try and cover intricacies of battle. If you know the war itself, it's almost like an exercise in futility. It's a month fighting for 100 yards and then another month losing 100 yards and maybe 300,000 people dying for those yards. And in the end, none of the yardage mattered at all. Like I said, it's a very weird, frustrating war to get from the outside. But this the best part of the book is the front half then, because it takes you inside. We start with Germany. And, of course, we're not doing the whole history of the German people. It'd be a separate book. So he tries to sort of grab the relevant time frame and move on from there. What we have is one, the general staff. The general staff being a core group of military people in each of whatever section you have, grouped together and functioning year-round, which is something that didn't exist, I guess, before Germans invented it. At least in the modern sense. And it would be a general thinking about such and such plan. What if the French attack? Well, we'll do X, Y, and Z. Well, we can't do X, Y, and Z. We don't have enough railroads. So he gets money from the government and builds railroads where he needs them. This kind of thing to put in your mind before a war where a certain industry might be placed or what you would need to, enact that war. What types of training we'll have. What types of plans we'll make. Right? This kind of thing is what the general staff wanted to do. Now, it came up against politics. They all did. The German politic was in, one, not wanting a change. Right? Like, so the old guard, the old people, the ones who are the generals, don't see a reason. Like, no, this has always been the way we do it. This is how it should be. And what they leaned on was, what was this battle called? It's a battle before World War II. I. The assault on Saint Privat. This was during the Franco-Prussian War, where the Prussian/German, right? It was before Germany existed, I believe. There were the wars of unification. Then, some aggressions out. This is one of those aggressions out where they fought France to get back old lands, I guess, that Napoleon had taken. Now, we start inching kind of back. In any case, there's some fortification. Now, we have, because it's not so long ago for their time, right? It's not like 80 years have gone by or something like this. Generally modern-ish weaponry. And there's a fortification that's just tiered in kind of a way. And the Prussian soldiers show up, and rather than wait for their artillery to come and sort of bombard the area, let's bum rush it, right? Let's be men and fight. And of course, machine guns, just do what machine guns do. But they're not super machine guns, if you know what I mean. They're not the Gatling guns. They're not this kind of... It didn't lay waste to all of them. So what they did is you spread out and you keep grinding. That's what they did. They keep grinding. Now, the romanticized version of this is that the infantry in their, in the most, masculine way, just gritted their teeth and fought through and won the day. And that's how, this is a major victory, and this is what turned the war. Right, so the new Germany is kind of built on this ideal of this battle. They glorify it. Now you look at the particulars, and that battle didn't end really until the artillery made it and really started hammering at certain positions. But we want to watch the part of the movie we want to watch, and that's what the Germans did. And so you have this spirit of this romanticized infantry fighting. The man with one fist seizing the opportunity, blah, blah, blah. And you merge that, right? That's the fertilizer. And what grows out of that is, if we had fought, We're surrounded by enemies. France doesn't like us. Germany doesn't like us. England don't really save us. They're on their island. They don't care about us. We're surrounded by enemies. So you have the strain of your mind perceived enemies. But also, if you glorify sort of an infantry charge style battle, then you, in your head, you kind of in a way think of the things that are best for that. So, if you have a tinge of worry, then your ideas start to lay bricks that say, the sooner the better. The sooner we fight, the less entrenched our enemy will be, and the easier it'll be for our infantry to be glorious the way we know they are and win us a war. Right? This sort of mantra built up in Germany. Cut to Russia. Russia, in a weird way, feels just as encircled as the Germans, which is odd to hear. On the one side, it's Germany is their problem, but also, I guess Poland and some of these, I guess they say the Baltic countries were owned by Russia for a bit, but there was bubbling up nationalism, right? To Poland to say we should be our own Poland. And so I have trouble on that side of me. Below, it's the Ottoman Empire. Even though it's breaking away, it's decaying, it's dying. The Russians have still been fighting them for 100, 200, 300 years, right? So they've had an issue with the Ottoman Empire. So in their head, that's still a problem. It hadn't been solved. And then on the way other side, they had issues with Japan. I think Russia wanted a more Pacific port than Vladivostok. I forget the name of this place. It just ices up half the year. So they wanted one further down, which is sort of more into China. I think they went down to Manchuria and owned some of that, but it brought them in, contact with the Japanese. The Japanese at that time, I'm not sure, owned Korea. They really wanted to keep Korea. They didn't want any issues with anyone taking it. So they were trying to make peace accords saying, right, so, you don't build too many Russian stuff over there in Manchuria, and I won't build too much extra in Korea, and we'll just be at ease. But this is an age of sort of wanton racisms, right? Towards the Jews. Not just the Jews, but also now towards anything Asia. I think at one point, a Russian was heard to have called them, like, the Asians, a little better than monkeys, right? So they looked down on them. In any case, they dragged their feet, they talked sideways to them, they cut off communications, right? And so Japan's like, well, F this. And they declared war on Russia. This is before World War I now. Not long before either. Japan jacked them up, right? Japan caught some of their fleet by surprise in port, jacked that fleet up, landed an army of sorts, and was just hammering away. Now, the Russians did what the Russians do. You slowly back up because you have about 60 billion miles of Russia that they got to capture before they can finish you off. And it's sort of like a moving aggressive fight. Now, if Japan had more people, nothing would have stopped them. They'd have just owned all of Russia. Problem is, you're losing 70,000, they're losing 100,000. But you're losing 70,000 dudes, right? And at some point, they're like, well, we've done what we needed to do. The Russian fleet had looped way around to try and, head them off. They get captured. They get beat the crap up. So now their navy's like in shambles. They've lost this war horribly. Japan then leaves because we did what we needed to do. And it's a complete embarrassment to the rest of Europe that Russia lost to these Asians. So when we cut back to our World War I-ish time, we see that war had an effect. How could it not? Now, did you learn the right lesson? No, the Russians did not. in their head, now part of it I think is separation. You know, the higher-ups may not have been over there. But some of it is those higher-ups. Some of the generals even that were there and saw it didn't take the right lesson. Because the lesson they took from this is that the guys I sent just weren't brave enough. That you let a little bit of heat come your way and you broke tail and you ran. And I'm like, this is odd. Why would you think that? But you got to remember, some of the people in charge, their parents or grandparents, you know, fought in the Napoleonic Wars. Big time, very famous. But again, the guns of the Napoleonic War are not modern machine guns. Machine guns don't care particularly how... I'm trying to think of the word. How honorably you fight, how heroic you are. There's not an amount of gumption that can overcome the position. You need to run out of bullets or you need to blow it up, right? You know, so they didn't understand this. So what got back to the Russians is they were just maybe too cowardly. And they ended up with a bayonet over bullets mentality. Literally. One of the generals decides that the Cossacks, their raiders, their cavalry types, that the problem was they didn't use their bayonets enough. So that if I take their carbines from them, they'll have to get in close. Boom, that'll fix it. This kind of mentality. Add to this, like this is the sort of absolute corruption behind the scenes of the Russian hierarchy. Sukhomlinov, I think that's his name, managed to get himself sort of the head of the general staff as they were making it. But instead of putting competent, capable people in the other positions, he's like, if I put you in as quartermaster, you're going to be good at your job, and they might replace me with you. That don't seem fun. So I'm going to put an idiot over there, or somebody who likes me. And then he filled his old position with this. So that when you need an accurate assessment of how many rounds you can make, he's not going to be able to give it to you because he's not qualified. And even if he did, right, you might not then put the effort into making more of the factories you need to make more artillery because you don't think you think artillery's cowardly to begin with and that it's probably not accurate enough and you're going to need more bayonets anyway. Right? The things just start swirling in on itself. Russia also had an issue with, I guess you'd say, multiculturalness. So, like, even from way back in Peter the Great's time, let's say, I want a new navy. He went and grabbed Dutch guys, right? Swiss dudes. And he hauled them to Russia, paid them well. But they helped him establish all the things. And the Russians were over here to the side. There's a whole district, I think there was at that time, of foreigners that lived in this part of Moscow, or later St. Petersburg, where, you know, Germans would be, Baltic Germans or Swedes or this kind of thing, right? So, but they're not Russian by birth. That doesn't mean they're not loyal. A lot of them were more loyal to the Tsar himself than most Russians were. Most Russians might have been more loyal to the land than the Tsar. It was an odd twist. But that the highest ups were these foreign types. Made a natural mistrust towards the aristocrats who were mostly part of the guards or part of the cavalry. And of course they would then resist any new ideas. Also, sort of down the line, corruption, where if you're like an officer or a soldier, and they give you a pair of boots, you would sell the boots for money and then get another pair. So when you're higher up, quartermaster, and you think, I've got 500,000 pairs of boots, so I have that many soldiers booted up, in actuality you might have half that, because half the idiots sold their boots, took 2 pair, and only had, there's only actually half that on feet. The rest have been sold and are, roaming around. This kind of issue they had. We did cut to sort of the third leg of this really dumb table. Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary was, what do they call it? The Jewel Empire. Run by the Habsburgs for, I don't know, 500 years or 700, whatever the thing is. They owned an odd bunch of people, and they had for a long time. But nationalism starts to arise. This can happen. The emperor sends troops in to quell a certain rebellion in Hungary. It gets heated, right? It's heavy fighting, but they end up doing the job. That buys them some time. At the same time, Germany's trying to unify, and they think, the Austrians speak German, they should be part of Germany. And not long after the first one here, he's like, I need to fight the Germans now, right? So in my head, I'm like, if you'd have backed off for 5 seconds maybe, and I had double fights back to back, maybe you'd have been better off. But that's not what the crap he did. He went, got up in it, lost horribly to the Germans. So now we're in negotiations with Germany, and Hungary decides, you're weak now. Maybe I'll go for my independence. And rather than a third, he decides, I gotta make peace everywhere. So the peace he makes is sort of establishing Hungary as a kingdom. So he's the emperor of Austria, but the king of Hungary. And now it has its own parliament. It can make its own money. It has its own army. And Austria has its own army. And I'm like, this is already not going to work really well. And it was a very convoluted mess, right? So down to what uniform who people wears, right? Austrians wear their uniform. The Hungarians are allowed to wear Hungarian uniforms. They would also allow you to wear an Italian one and wear you an Italian. But anyone in the Austrian army has to wear their uniform. And then we have some odd joint Austria-Hungary military setup. I think they called it the KUK. I don't remember the long German acronym, what it stands for. So their whole setup is this joint multilateral, this kind of a headache. The Austrians, I think, romanticized the past even more than the others, because I feel like they felt it slipping, right? They could feel the Italians, the Romanians, the Poles, all the sort of pieces they had, they could feel their grip lessening on these. So when they looked to the Boer War, which is the British in South Africa, right? They had issues. Every one of the fights, they could lose a fight to a smaller entrenched group, but of course overwhelming numbers eventually won. And when they looked at the Russo-Japanese War, the Austrians, they, I guess on purposely, you could see what the machine gun's doing, right? But the lessons they took from it are, who ended up winning? Well, aggression won. Aggression won for the Japanese. That's why they beat the Russians, even though in the end they had no attainable victory. There was no point. They didn't own ground afterwards, right? So all of what is his name? Conrad's. That's the guy in charge of their planning. Conrad's plans were for, these elaborate sharp thrusts in. If we thrust in and envelop, we win. But he didn't have the ability to. And of all of them, the worst to do this was the Austrians, where they would, I'm going to get all sort of the rich guys, because they're the ones who were the officers and generals and whatnot. And we're going to war game something out, right? And so if I have to go from this point to that point, I just make my troops hoof it, clock me, all right, and now I can do such and such in my head, right? As opposed to the reality of that would be they'd have to hoof it, and then they'd be wore out and not be able to fight. They didn't look at that part. Right? Let's not worry about that. I can cover this amount of ground in a day, and that's how far it is on the map. And I'm like, yeah, well, what about the mountains through there? That's not a problem. Mountains aren't a problem. Well, what if, machine gun dudes are on the top of those mountains? You know what? A bayonet, a cavalry charge. All these kind of wild ideas. So they left a lot of stuff on the cutting room floor that would have had a major impact, and then planned accordingly. Planned in a sense of these unrealistic, unattainable setups. So when you start, what do they call it? Mobilization. If I start building up guys, then you'll start building up guys, right? That didn't help. But in their head, they're like, I need 200,000 men in this spot. Yeah, I can get them there. But then when you actually try, to actually move 200,000 human beings, the trains are full. The track's overused. The bridge gave out. We got to build a new one, etc., etc., etc. And the people in those posts weren't never highly rated, right? Because it's not the sexy cavalry charge with all the gold medals. The dude who runs the quartermaster, or the lumber guy who makes sure you have enough to build another railroad track. That's not fun. The Richies don't want that job. Neither will they listen when he speaks. So, but now war starts and you need him. There's nothing doing, right? You're not fixing it mid-fight. You needed to fix it before, and none of them did. They all ended up with a bad type of practice. But the Austrians were really the worst. And the emperor, I forget his name. I forget the emperor's name, but what did they call him? One guy described him as a man who every day was his birthday. He really liked to be chummy with the soldiers. So when we do a practice, I want to lead the cavalry charge, and I'm running around with my sword out and my shiny medals, and nothing really productive's getting done, and no one could tell him anything because he's the emperor, right? All these problems they had before the war. Add to it this Conrad's idea, like the others, of these quick jabs in. I need a quick, decisive victory is the term they always used. If we go quick, surround them, crush them, then we've had this great victory. And in his head, the victory could re-glorify the Austrian Empire and keep it whole. Keep this thing whole that's been for so long. Which, it's a human thing to think. I think Winston Churchill thought a lot of the same thing. He was very sad when his empire went away, even though England was still there. So that part's not unusual. But it sucks for all those people that, all these people had to die for him to find out his plan is never going to work. Because when the crap hit the fan, it hit the fan horribly. This is a side note, okay? But of course, it matters. And the side note's a bit political, a bit current. So if you're annoyed at this subject matter already, one, I apologize. But for the people who watch in the future, disconnected to this a little, it'll be more interesting. When ye old Trump was getting, shot at, when his ear got shot, the assassination attempt of Trump. I go to Twitter. As I'm seeing this, I'm like, oh look, somebody shot at Trump. As I'm seeing that, the part in the book that I'm listening to is literally the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. It was kind of trippy as that was happening. I'm always going to remember those two linked now. I thought it's just, what a weird cosmic moment, right? In any case, that's as political as I'll get. Archduke Franz Ferdinand. This is the guy who got shot and got the whole ball rolling that wanted to get rolling anyway. And the worst part about it is, not that the dude got shot, which is a tragedy. Rip that guy. The problem is he was about to be emperor. And he was the exact emperor you would want if you are the other ancillary countries to Austria. I think in his head he saw Austria becoming part of Germany. He didn't have a problem with that. He was willing to, I think, like Britain, make Austria, instead of an empire, like a commonwealth, where the Romanians, the Italians, the the Serbians, the Hungarians, all had their own government, their own armies, their own parliaments, their own presidents, their own kings. I think he was going to set that up. And if he'd have set that up, we'd lose a lot of the tension that was in the Baltics that popped the whole thing off anyway. Instead, he gets shot by someone who wants exactly what he wanted but didn't want to wait. And the whole ball of yarn goes. Everyone knows everyone's secretly in league with someone else. So when this comes undone, the Austrians see it as a way to get at, I think, Serbia? I need a reason to go into war anyway. We were always going to go. The faster, the better. That's what everyone was thinking. Then the French thing, there's no way Austria's acting alone. I bet Germany's trying to help. And then Germany's like, look at the French making all those moves over there. I bet they're really coming in to attack me. And then the Russians are like, there's no way the Germans are just going to go fight the French and leave us alone. So they start building up dudes. And it's just a build up everywhere until the powder keg goes off, obviously. They all thought it was going to end in like a week. I don't know why everyone thinks these wars are just going to go quick. They all thought it'd end in a week, it'd be done with. If you know anything about World War I, what ends up happening is lines were drawn, right? Like so. We both are trying to get around the left side of the other guy. Right? So if I'm trying to sneak around you and you're trying to sneak around me and we're both picking the same side, what ends up happening? We're here. I'm going to sneak here. Then you sneak here. Like, oh, he's still there. Oh, crap, he's still there. Oh, crap. Miles of this stretching all across Europe. And then somebody would be like, well, charge the hill. And the dudes, to their credit, for honor and for country and with gumption, they got up over them trenches and ran. And then were obliterated by machine guns in just droves. And then would do it again. And then again. And then again. And yard here. And then we back up in yards there. It's just the biggest waste almost you can see in history. Just waste of human lives. What did they call it? The flower of Europe. Just these young men just roasted for no reason. Sort of the last 2 points I think I'll make. Oddly, the ones who wanted it the most, the Austrians, were just the least prepared to handle their setup. They didn't have the right railroads. They didn't have the right troops. They fought the old way the longest, right? Where it's the officer bravely with a shout and a sword leads his troops. So their officer corps just got obliterated faster than everyone's. And it had the most effect on them than the other ones because if a German officer goes down, there's another German to take his place. Also, the setup is more shared information, right? So the subordinate knows what the leader's going to do. So if he dies, he can still do the thing all the way almost down to the squadron level. The Austrians didn't have that setup. Add to this, they have multiple cultures in their empire, right? So when an Austrian officer dies, there goes the person who knew the 3 languages of the people that are in this particular army. And the new guy coming in doesn't know the language. Now we can't even talk to each other. There's a disconnect between the troops and their men, etc., etc. They were the least prepared to handle it. The Serbia, the ones, I think they had just been in Baltic War, some kind of Baltic uprising. They had just fought. And they're like, we don't have it in us to do this big spear attack. Their whole plan, just randomly, almost, out of everyone in Europe, was to hold out until Germany did their thing till Russia did their thing to the Germans, and then would come and help them with Austria. So, from the beginning, their idea was to be extremely defensive, which is what you wanted to be in this war. And they were able to, of course, because you have the mountains and rivers and all kinds of mess in Serbia. They're just able to hold out against the whole Austrian army. Did they lose jack tons of people? Yes. Did they lose as many as Austria? No. Did they lose as many as Germany? I don't think so. Percentage-wise, probably a rough number to deal with. But they never lost their spot. They just almost, it seems like dumb lucked their way into the best strategic way to fight this modern war. Had they but known it. Like I said, the rest of it is very detailed military movements, which I did enjoy, but you can't really get into. And again, even if I did, it's not like Remember the Alamo. There are some remembered, not some, they're all remembered battles, but nothing was achieved. Which, okay, to me, that's the last part. None of them, not Austria, not Germany, not Russia, ever had in their mind the end point. It was always a weird envelopment. Like, if I could just envelop the entire army, I win the thing. But the modern war is get another 60,000 dudes with guns and run them to the front, right? None of them ever had in their mind an endpoint, an idea. If we make it to Moscow and own it, then we'd have won, right? But there was no city you could take either. The era of taking a city and winning a war sort of ended. You needed to take ports and facilities and roads or something, right? You need to own geography. They didn't have any concept of that before this war started. And they paid for it. And the people paid for it horribly. All right. I think I'll end on that. The rest is, like I said, very deep, detailed military movements, which I did enjoy, honestly. And if I listen to the next one in this series, I probably will, I'm going to pull up a map to go with it the whole time. It'll make it more enjoyable. Okay. Ad time? Yes. These are my books. I don't have a history book. I haven't written a history. All of mine are completely made up. So if you want made up words instead of words about real things, then get my book over this history book. No, this is a very good book. I liked it. I enjoyed myself. It was very fun. And it's not, like I said, it's not heavy on the gore, which a war book can get into, or be too dramatic for Not saying for no reason it is important that those people died, but also at a certain point you need to take a step back and, understand the full story, the scope, so to speak. Okay, people. I'll talk to you all next week.